Me, of course, Patrick Brendel from Cayman Current. I'm calling this episode 8, Take 2. If you've seen the other one, you know why I'm take 2ing. I even put on lipstick to compensate for my epic audio failures. Patrick, forgive me for making us do this again.
No, it's double the fun.
Experiment or doublemint or whatever it was, as I'm a mature person. So we are back again, and we're talking about this week in particular, the strategic policy statement and the budget. The Cayman Islands government, the new PACT government, I want to say unveiled the strategic policy statement in the House of Parliament, but I guess it's presented, which provides, and I like the word high level this month, but provides a high level view of what we're spending, what we think we're going to spend, where we think the revenue is coming from, what the economic situation of the country is, but also what we're going to do with that money as a government in a country. And from my perspective, Patrick, which I also, so was my perspective, my disclaimer, I do think it provides some great insight into what we see as the priorities if we're the people making the choices. Because when you put your money where your mouth is, that means you actually probably mean it, right?
Yes, agreed.
Someday Patrick's waiting for me to ask like a direct question. So Patrick, what can you tell us about the strategic policy statement when it comes to education?
Well, you mentioned putting your money where your mouth is, and the PACT government has done that almost literally. They have made education as their number one top line priority, and maybe the subset number one priority initiative within that priority is free school meals for all public school students. So putting your money where your mouth is. Yeah, and so that's just actually free. Yeah, and free school meals is just one of 29 different initiatives that the PACT has on education, and that covers everything from having public schools operate nursery programs for 3-year-olds, all the way up to increasing the scholarship age to encourage adults to pursue postgraduate studies. They want to bring back A-levels into the public schools. They're talking about offering free tuition at UCCI and ICCI for Caymanian students. There's before school programs, after school programs, homework centers, learning support centers in every public school, putting a nurse in every public school, guaranteeing that there's going to be a teaching assistant or a teacher's aide in every class up to year 9. They want to make sure all the students have laptops and all the students have internet access at home, as well as enhancing the internet access in the schools. They want to, and then there's some things that aren't really high dollar programs, but they are kind of fundamental policy changes. For example, they want to have a centralized TVET curriculum starting all the way back in primary school. They want to pass legislation and create a framework for accountability for schools and teachers. They want to create a board of governors to oversee the public school system. They want to do programs to encourage the integration of Caymanians and non-Caymanian students in the education system. And they want to improve the criteria for graduation to end the practice of social promotion. So, I mean, what I've been thinking, it's almost like watching an episode of the Oprah show, and they're saying, you got a program, you got a program, you got a program, you got a program. Another way to think of it.
Ivy League education under that one. And the one over there, you're going to be an IT expert before you're 9. I'm not mocking it, though. I do appreciate this investment in education as a parent of multiple children, and Patrick, you are as well. We know that the more emphasis and focus on education, in theory, the better, right, for the community as a whole. Now, I just want to point out, though, I'm doing it backwards, aren't I? I always do. Over here, I've managed to magically show Patrick's website, caymancurrent.org, which is focused on education, of course. And you can see Patrick has like this super detailed story that really looks at a lot of the things that he's talked about and a whole bunch more. And I want, besides where it's a new trick for me, Patrick, I just think it's great that you've outlined kind of all those components and elements that you've talked about. It's all in kind of one big page document. I love it. It makes it much easier for me and lots of people like me to kind of process and go through and say, okay, what were the most important components of this? And then, we can harass you later to do detailed stories on each one, for example, especially in a couple of years when we want to see, did the money we put toward did these things happen, number one? And then number two, did the money we put toward those things actually pay off in terms of some, type of success, depending on how you measure all that?
Yeah, and we're going to be, yes, and we're going to be reporting on the different aspects of the SPS throughout next week and probably the week after. So one of the stories that I want to do is one of the big question marks for me with the whole government changing, but Juliana O'Connor Connolly remaining the Minister of Education. And as Premier Panton has pointed out a couple times, this is the first time kind of in modern history that you're going to have a repeat education minister. So for me, the question was, okay, so how much does Education Minister O'Connor Connolly's plans for her ministry, how does that compare from the PPM government or the progressives-led government to the new PACT government? So was the stuff they were doing 3 or 4 years ago the progressives plan? And is this going to be different from the minister? Is it going to be the minister unleashed? Or is there going to be a lot of continuity? So one of the things I'm going to look at next week is do kind of line item by line item, looking at the progressives manifesto and the programs that they called for and how that compares to the plans in SPS.
And one thing I think, this just was an interesting question about one of our common criticisms. We used the term political football on our last episode of Edbeat. And if you have some consistency in terms of the minister, I can't imagine that she would want to dismantle things that they worked very hard on. It's actually an interesting kind of opportunity to discard the things that don't work, no harm, no foul, so to speak, and to change directions if you need to, or expand upon the things that were there before. And so I find that really interesting, just in general. You're going to do that kind of blow by blow comparison, but I think in some respects it speaks to, let's see whether the policies are really all that different either. Is it really just about which party folks are with, or is it about, here are the things we think are the right things to do? We may change the flavor and color a little bit, but at the core, the principles are the same. I don't know. I think as you do that, we'll get a better sense of kind of where they were, where we are, and then maybe in a little bit where we're headed next. Is there anything that you saw from what you were hearing that had you, I don't know, concerned or intrigued?
Well, I think one of the
I'm not trying to put you in the bias category, Patrick. I don't mean it that way, but I mean just, were there any red flags in there for you or something?
Yeah, I wasn't scared by anything, but I was concerned. Another way to think about, at least the way I think about this SPS, we mentioned Oprah, but also I think of it as like a Christmas tree. Say you come in and they've got all the ornaments on the tree, you've got all the presents, everything, in theory looks really good.
It does.
I've got feedback from various people in the communities about the plans that have been announced. For example, I think we're going to talk more about this next week, hopefully, on the show, is Feed Our Future is a nonprofit that was established 10 years ago. And their primary program right now is providing free and low-cost meals to Cayman students. So if the government goes forward with its plans for free school meals, it takes away that, smacking the camera, it takes away the need for that primary program. And, they say they couldn't be happier about it because, as a mission-oriented organization, they want this to happen in the most efficient and effective way possible. And there's plenty of other stuff that they can do to make sure that Cayman students and young people are well-fed and well-nourished. And so that's just an example of, a positive reaction that I've gotten. But when it comes to Christmas, and as everybody knows, you got to pay for it. Santa Claus leaves a bill along with all his goodies. And there's two ways to pay for Christmas. And one is to scrimp and save and have a jar and save up for your budget and spend from the budget. And another way is to pull the credit card out and say, I'm not going to worry about it till February. And the government's doing plans to do a little bit of both. So when we talk about, as you mentioned, continuity in education from administration to administration, one thing that's been constant over the past 10 years is we're spending more and more money on public education in Cayman. And that's with the student body remaining about the same number of kids. So, and these numbers I've gotten all from the Auditor General. They did a really good report on this about a year and a half, 2 years ago. So it's getting a little bit dated, but it's a really good source of information. So in 2019, which is the last year, the most recent year that I have for education spending, we spent $95 million on public education. The SPS is calling for $136 million to be spent in 2022. And they want to increase that to $152 million in 2024. So I rounded it off. I said, hey, that's a 50% increase in education spending in 5 years. And if you go back a little bit further, and if you look at education spending a little differently, education spending is the number one portion of the government core budget. So when you look at healthcare and law enforcement and all this other stuff, education has the biggest slice of the pie. So in 2014, education accounted for 10% of core government spending. So 10 cents out of every dollar went to education. In 2018, that rose to 13%. And in 2024, they project it to be 18% of the budget. So, as we say, put your money where your mouth is. As we used to like to say when I was on the Compass editorial board is, when you're making a budget, every dollar is a decision. So every time you're apportioning money, you're placing relative importance on it. So I think it's fair to say that, for the past 10 years or so, the governments have been making education, have been considering it more and more important, at least from a spending perspective.
Right. So the money is one huge part of this equation. Of course, delivering on the promise of that investment is another. And we have talked about this a few times, you and I, about, what does that look like? How do you assess success when it comes to this type of investment on this scale? We are not just talking either about primary school students or high school students. This is a huge spectrum, if that's the right word, from reception pre-K all the way up through, university and grad school. I mean, I know grad school's university too, but we're seeing an expansion in opportunities for people who want to pursue graduate degrees, for example, in terms of the potential scholarship funding is what I'm getting at. The age range is increasing. So we're looking at this sort of lifelong learning ideology. And the government currently is saying, yep, we will put the money to do this. A point I touched on with you before that I do think bears repeating is the fact that when you are in a time of economic uncertainty, it may seem, to some folks anyway, a bit extravagant to spend money on, schools. These things are not necessarily going to generate a bunch of jobs in tomorrow, but they've taken kind of a twofold approach, right? The government is saying we're going to spend some of this money on things that are related to the construction sector, capital projects, things that will, keep people employed and working. And on the other hand, we're going to invest in education and upskilling, which ideally, as the world's economic or our economic situation improves, i.e., I think the borders reopening will mean more money, which it may or may not. It should, but at the end of the day, your idea is I'll get the Cayman population upskilled and ready to earn lots of money. By the time they're out of school, they'll be ready to go, and we will have transformed things. Not that it's bad today, but
yeah. Yeah,
I'm
and I
interested to
think,
see the thinking here.
and when you, and even in the near term, when you talk about, here's my Venn diagram, you're talking about investing on the future and stimulus right now, and there's this little overlap in the middle. Um, they have some of that going on too in the education budget. And when I believe it was in the deputy premier's part of the presentation where he talks about economic performance and things that are going to boost the economy over the next couple of years. One of the things he talked about was the positive impact on the construction sector of government capital projects.
Correct.
And the biggest one that's going on is the new John Gray High School. So the SPS, just stepping back one half step, the SPS includes $440 million in spending on education over 3 years. And that's just operating. That doesn't include another $100 million on capital projects for education. So that's the new John Gray High School. They want to expand the Lighthouse School. They need to, and I mentioned they're creating nursery programs and having these learning support centers where they're actually going to build physical classrooms, adding on to the public schools to accommodate that. And then they're going to give $10 million. They've budgeted $10 million for UCCI. Probably, they were just given a nice piece of land next to the campus, and they have plans for like a building there. So so in terms of construction spending, they're going to put $100 million into the ground um,
And a
in the
win-win,
next
though,
3 years.
if your idea is we want to serve both masters on this one. And it's not to say that education wasn't the only thing on that agenda, but I did find the placement of education in that list. So there was a list of, say, 9. These are 9 areas that we're going to focus on. Education was the first one on that list. And I did find that placement interesting. We are also dealing with a government that, for the most part, did not campaign together. There were, alliances or whatever you want to call them, and lots of conversations, but they did not all campaign together as a party. So, I'd love to have been a fly on the wall while some of these things are getting hashed out, to be honest. I think that would be interesting, to say the least. But that said, who's going to say, no, we really don't need to spend money on education? And I just got elected. No, I don't need to do anything that's going to help the people who elected me into office have jobs either. I mean, both of these seem like win-wins, if you will. And I, the nerd that I am, was also interested in the investment in the undersea cable. I thought that was really interesting, based on the experience we had just had with COVID, where we're all, in a lockdown, and kids are trying to, go to school online for the first time, really. And yeah, the internet joked, coughed, took a nap sometimes. It was not the easiest thing. So I even feel like you even can look at that as an investment in the infrastructure necessary for education as well. So there's some interesting things going on there. Of course, the budget isn't till November, right? So what is said in terms of concept, and here's what we're planning to do, there can be some changes between this point and that budget, because there's multiple steps and stages. Every government entity or agency or department has asked for certain things and wants those things, but they may have to give and take a little depending, on how things go between now and then.
Yeah, and I think this SPS, because we're dealing with a new government, but also a new political entity, a coalition of independents. I'm kind of, this SPS to me plays like a double role. As one is a government policy document, but second, it's almost like playing the role as like a manifesto for the PACT government. So this is the first time that we've really gotten to take a look at not only specific policy proposals, but as you mentioned, like what are their priorities? And if they're making education the number one top line priority, then to me it seems like they're asking, if you're going to, in a few years, if you're going to go back and judge the success of this government, you go back to item number one: how did we do on education?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And while I reviewed the document, I'm not going to say that I really have. I'm not sat down with my popcorn and my T and gone through it methodically and made that checklist of, okay, so what am I going to look for in the next couple of years to see, where the wins and failures and such, or not so much because I think I'm looking for people to trip and fall, but more I'm interested in seeing that journey. I'm not, I'm a nice person, Patrick.
I won't tell.
But I do like to have a sense of the journey from point A to point B and what things happen that you don't expect. So I'm fresh out of the gate. I have big dreams, big plans, big ideas. Here's what I think is going to happen. And along the way, things change sometimes. Sometimes they don't. The ultimate measure of success for this, though, isn't just people who say they're satisfied with education or people who are satisfied with the schools and their performance, but ultimately it's having this engaged, educated population that's doing well and the society is prospering. I mean, I am thinking of it more from an economic perspective, just because, well, the strategic policy statement is a lot about money. There are other, wonderful reasons about being a great citizen and contributing to society and building character, all that stuff too. But in many respects, how we proceed forward. You mentioned, I think it was perhaps the benchmark is every school is a good school in terms of the Office of Education Standards. But I feel like we do need some sort of report card to help us see how we've done and whether it worked. And I say we not because I have any political affiliation necessarily, but I just think that when you're talking about education like this, you're talking about something that affects every single person, whether your child is in a public school, a government school, and whether even if you don't have children at all. I think you are affected by the caliber and quality of education, and the next generation is the one that's going to take care of you, which does remind me of something you said earlier about paying for Christmas. There was a point that I would love to hear just a little bit more on about, you said it's kind of a split approach, right? They're not all borrowing, they're not all paying right now, but it does mean that the investment we're making in our young people is something that they will likely be the ones to have to pay. Maybe not maybe not the preschoolers or the year one students, but definitely those on the older, side of the scale. It will be up to them to make sure that the country's doing well and that we can pay back the money we borrowed.
Yeah, and I guess first at the current, when I was starting the Cayman Current, and I knew I wanted to pick a specific issue, and as soon as I decided I was going to take that approach, education was the only choice for me in terms of what we were going to cover. And as you said, like education, and you can look at all sorts of studies that show this, but education is linked to every other aspect of society, whether it's criminal justice, healthcare, or public health, happiness indicators, economy. It all education's tentacles are all over that. So in terms of the spending, so the operating expenditures for the school system are going to come out of normal general revenue. They're continue, it's still going to be a pay as we go. But when we get to the capital projects, and as I said, that's $100 million in spending on education, plus another, I think, $230 million for other capital project investments. So that's where the credit card's coming out. And as we all know from after I think they were the CDP at the end of this, after McKeeba Bush's UDP government, and we got the framework for fiscal responsibility. And so I think a big job that the progressives have had over the past 8 years is abiding by the terms of that agreement. It meant no running budget deficits, no borrowing. You got to keep certain cash balance on hand, et cetera, et cetera. They were really focused on checking off those boxes until the UK finally said, "Hey, we're satisfied with what we're doing. Collar's coming off. You're free to do as you want." So when COVID hit, the progressives government secured a $330 million line of credit because they anticipated, of course, this big hit on the economy and government coffers. So the PACT government comes in, they see the line of credit, and they say, "This is how we're going to pay for the construction projects." So all the money they've spent on the John Gray project, for example, and the road construction, before the election, that was a pay as you go. Now it's coming on the credit card bill, and yes, that is going to be paid back with interest over years or even decades, depending on how government finances look going forward, and maybe they refinance or do all this kind of complicated stuff. But yeah, we were pulling out, spending it out of the deficit and some debt now, which is really normal. And that's normal for all governments. What's really been abnormal is us, is Cayman not having debt spending over the past few years. So we're it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it is a reality that we have to keep in mind.
So ultimately, it will be. I feel like I'm going to express an opinion, Patrick. It does feel a bit though that in terms of the way that, we're kicking the can in terms of the money in the country a little bit down the road, because the timing of how and when to reopen the borders, tourism, what will it look like? What kind of revenue will we get? Will we be back to that? What we were seeing before, what will it look like? These are all questions. There's not 100% clarity. You could throw open the borders next Tuesday and still not see what you saw before COVID. We just, we may have projections, we have estimates and ideas, but you don't actually know. And, a good chunk of change came from that industry for Cayman. We've also seen a lot of people out of work, since March 2020, which is not easy. And so we're going to have to keep an eye on it. There's just no way around it, is to kind of see, what will be done if we can't open the borders when we want to. The vaccination rate, we're not there yet. So, are there alternative methods of generating, money for the society? I don't know how much construction we can do, before we run out of things to construct. So, I'm curious, if nothing else, and of course curious because it affects the quality of my life. But
Yeah, and I will say in the SPS, the economic projections are quite bullish.
The phrase I could not remember. I said aggressive. I said this. I should. If I edit this before it goes out, I will find my little chart maker and I will make said chart. But I did find that I raised this eyebrow or that eyebrow. I can't do the other one. I raised one eyebrow because I thought, wow, the difference between this one year in terms of growth and the other, it's a big jump between them to me. And I thought, man, you see, that's a little optimistic. I hope you're right, but it does raise a concern, right? What if it's
Yeah, and when you're a professional budget forecaster for governments, the best ones under promise and over deliver. So they'll say, I anticipate 0.8% growth next year, knowing within their range that maybe they're going to get 1.2. And then when they get 1.2, they get to play again, we'll say Santa Claus, and come in and say, look at this extra revenue that we have. And then, so
what we have done.
So on the way in, people say, oh, this person's being very safe and fiscally conservative. And then they go, oh, wow, isn't this person great for making all this money available to spend? So, hopefully the budget forecasting is gonna, that's how it's gonna play out here. Because, we all want things to get, a lot better, a lot faster.
That is for sure. All right, I'm just going to one more time show my new magic trick where I get to show the Cayman Current. That's Patrick's website. It is nonprofit focused on education. He's drinking some tea. But the great thing about
you can't see that.
Can't you? You're in a little tiny box in the corner. Well, we don't know if it's actually tea, but we think it's tea. But it is a great resource in many ways, not just for parents and people who are interested in, and teachers and academians, people who are interested in following what's going on in education, but it's also a great research resource as well, Patrick, which I think it's very valuable in that respect, because you're really putting a lot of context around a lot of different issues related to education and exploring some things in more depth than we might normally see or have time to do. So you need to check Patrick out. There's this thing here. It says support the current. It's red. I'm going to see if I can click it. I'm not very sophisticated here. And it shows you how you can donate funds. See, I like a thing that's easily online. But also you can join the conversation too, right? And you can email Patrick at pbrendel@caymancurrent.org, his correct email address, I might point out. Don't ask me why I pointed that out. And you can leave comments on his Facebook page. But the website's great. There's a lot of information there. And, Patrick is all about doing the hard work of making sure you know what you need to about education in the Cayman Islands, and also sometimes contrasting with what's going on regionally and internationally, which is also kind of cool. All right, Patrick, I'm trying to figure out how to turn it off now, right? A YouTuber, I'm definitely not. They're all like, click subscribe. I know, it's magic. Yeah. Well, thanks so much again, Patrick. And Patrick and I join brains once a week with Edbeat. We want to make sure that we are showcasing all the great stories Patrick is doing. It also gives me an opportunity to learn more and really, get an idea of what's behind, what's in the brain of the guy writing the stories about the education thing, because it's good.
Yeah, thanks. Glad to be here again this week.
Twice this 1 week. Okay, and real quickly, anything you need to mention before I wrap us up? Because my hairspray can only stay this way for so long before the hair falls.
You have a big timer on the wall?
It's in front of me, yeah.
Yeah, I'll just point out as you talk about how things change between policy statements and budget statements. And I just want to talk about kind of verbal statements from Premier Panton, and how people's perspectives changes, or an official government line will change as you get a group of cabinet together. So during the campaign, in his official education platform, which we published on our website, candidate Panton's take was, and I'm quoting, government has put so much money into education, yet we are still failing to achieve satisfactory student attainment levels, which is really frustrating. So that's candidate Panton saying we're putting a lot of money into it, which is true, and the results are not satisfactory, which is frustrating. So when he's in Parliament the other day, this is Premier Panton. He says, we've allowed a myth to take over our public education system, that our children coming through the public school system have been poorly educated, that they are not fit for the job market, that being Caymanian and being educated within one of the best funded education systems per capita in the region somehow makes them less than those individuals educated elsewhere. This is a lie that we have allowed to take root in the hearts and minds of our students and our people. I have seen it impact their self-esteem and self-confidence. It's a lie that we have allowed to chip away at our sense of pride in who we are. But our external exam results, our curriculum, the performance of our students, the dedication of our teachers and administrators prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the big lie is just that, a fallacy, a myth, a construction of falsehood. And so Premier Panton's stance, which is that the public education system has a bad image rather than it's having poor results, that's in line with what the Deputy Premier, Chris Saunders, said on the campaign trail. So it makes me think, okay, is this when you're coming together as cabinet and everybody talks and the government decides, well, this is going to be the PACT government's take on the performance of the public education system? Is it that Chris has pulled Wayne aside and said, hey, actually, here's my charts and graphs, and here are all the reasons why I said this on the campaign trail, and the premier has changed his mind and this is his personal opinion? I don't know, but I think it's interesting to note how much things can change in a short period of time.
It is.
And that being said, they're going to increase spending on education by 50%. So where does the politics and the rhetoric and the governance and the spending, which to me is way more important?
Yeah, I mean, I did, and I did pull it up for folks to see, because Patrick has nicely placed this on his website. It lives there. It is interesting once you get inside, how much of that is, you know what, I'm taking a different look at this from the other side of the table, and I see it differently, versus I changed my mind. or I didn't mean it in the first place. And I'm not implying that he didn't. I'm just saying it is one of those things where you go, on the campaign trail, everything is wrong with government and everything is wrong
Yep.
with the way things are happening. And then when you're in office, it's like, no, everything's not broken, just a little bit, and I'm going to fix it and I'll save the day. And if I were 15, maybe I wouldn't see that, but I've seen a lot of governments come and go, often the same players switching, over different terms. But yeah, I've heard the back and forth for years, and I'm telling you that it does change once people sit down in the room. They start pulling out the charts and the numbers and looking around the table at the people who are rolling up their sleeves doing the work. It is interesting how that position sounds a little different. A bit different.
Yeah, and I think you're exactly right. And you could see it, say, in the United States, where a big issue in the last campaign, presidential campaign, was border security and detention and separation of families at the border. Putting children in jail, kind of thing. And so Joe Biden came in with a big mandate from his base to change the border policy. And then when he got into office, he goes, this is really tough. And it took months and months, and he had to make a decision that he wasn't making a decision, because he got in and it wasn't as easy as they maybe thought it was. And I don't know how anybody feels about a previous president with George W. Bush, but one of his big statements or views upon leaving office has been about, everybody said I made the wrong decision on Iraq or whatever, but you weren't in the chair. You weren't making the decision. So the title of his memoir was Decision Points. And he even wanted to incorporate it in his presidential museum, where you're pretending to be president. Here's the information coming in. What decision do you make?
That's awesome,
And
actually. That's
yeah,
a great
so I
idea.
mean, I don't, I think that really puts in relief, when things look different when you're sitting in the big chair.
I've got to say, and I've been on multiple sides of situations before, and boy, it sure looks different when you're presented with this other sets of information that you were not privy to previously, or perhaps just perspectives you did not consider. It's interesting, but I guess that's how politics rolls. Anyway, Patrick, we better wrap things up because my hairspray is falling. But also I know you got to get back to slaving over that hot keyboard because he's typing away furiously. Yeah, not funny. All right, thanks everybody for hanging out with us once again. And remember, you can always check out Patrick at caymancurrent.org. You can check us out also at caymanlife.ky, and we're uploading this to the TV channel as well, so you can watch it at your convenience from your couch or on YouTube or on Facebook or wherever you would like. Have a great one, everybody.